In the description for its second trailer, named The Hunter's Journey, Monster Hunter Wilds is advertised as the most cinematic and immersive story in Monster Hunter series history. This is, perhaps, a low bar to clear, but it nonetheless remains true. The main story of the game chronicles the exploits of the Forbidden Lands Expedition Team, a special task force of 8 4-person units from the Hunters Guild. Core story focuses on 2 of these 8 units. Avis unit, which consists of the player character, the Hunter, their Palico companion, their guild handler, Alma, a cultural anthropologist, and the smithy Gemma. Alongside this is Astrum unit, which consists of the ace hunter Olivia, her Palico companion Athos, her guild handler Eric, a biologist, and the engineer and smithy Werner. Arguably, however, the primary protagonist of Monster Hunter Wilds is none of these figures. Rather, it is a young boy named Nata, who is placed under the protection of Avis unit, that is of Alma, Gemma, and your hunter. Nata, whose age is ambiguous but likely in his early to mid-teens, is the first person to be encountered from the Forbidden Lands, a land previously thought to be uninhabited. He was found collapsed at the edge of the desert by Alma and her mentor Fabius on a recon mission several years prior to the game's start. Claiming to be from a group called the Keepers, Nata fled his home after it was attacked by a mysterious monster, nicknamed the White Wraith, which resembles a previously thought to be extinct species. What follows is in many ways a classic road trip narrative, which are among my favourite types of narrative. The core cast journeys eastwards through the Forbidden Lands, later simply renamed the Eastlands, encountering dangerous monsters, human and non-human cultures, and fresh mysteries as they push slowly towards the heart of a long-dead civilization and solve the entwined enigmas of Nata's origin, the identity of the White Wraith, and the very ecological structure of the world around them. And, as is common in road trip stories, along the way they learn new things about themselves and each other, forming new bonds of understanding. Wilds' narrative is not strictly the most original narrative, but it executes it and its core themes genuinely very well, for the most part. And one of the ways it does this is through its strong use of dyadic pairings and narrative foils. And that's the aspect that I want to talk about today. I want to start with a simple definition. In literary analysis, a narrative foil is a character or entity that is used to highlight or contrast another. The term comes from the way that gemstones would often be backed by silver foil in jewelry to better emphasize their luster. A narrative foil does the same thing, but metaphorically. It creates a backing against which the qualities of a character or a situation might shine the brighter. Antagonists are one of the most common types of literary foils, often used to contrast the protagonist in both their similarities and their differences. But mentors, students, friends, lovers, and even strangers met in passing can all act as narrative foils within a story, and stories will often have multiple foils to shed light on different aspects of a single character. This is actually true of Wilds, where Nata is contrasted to 2 distinct narrative foils throughout the game. The first is the game's flagship monster, Arkveld, the White Wraith. The second is the player character, the Avis Hunter. Good day everyone, this is Laraika Laray, your local gaming academic, and today we're doing a deep dive into the character and the journey of Nata, and the implementation of narrative foils in the story of Monster Hunter Wilds. Please like, subscribe, sit back, and relax. The contrast between the Hunter and Nata is established from relatively early in the game, and is interesting both from a narrative perspective and in the design decisions that were made to accommodate it. Unlike in previous games, the Hunter is given an explicit voice within cutscenes and ambient dialogue, a shift away from the franchise's history of generally silent protagonists. While the Hunter is fully customizable in appearance and voice, this decision already pushes them slightly outside of the realm of standard video game self-inserts, and this is reflected slightly in-game. The Hunter is, in a shift distinct from some previous Monster Hunter games, framed as older and more experienced. The Hunter acts decisively throughout the story, understanding when certain actions are necessary even when they are hard or painful. They had to learn an entire new language in preparation for the expedition, and they are hand-chosen by Fabius for this mission because of their track record. A record that, while left deliberately vague, is remarked upon by others throughout the story. During a section in the latter parts of the game in which Avis' unit is sheltering in a room in the Ice Shard Cliffs, the hunter is able to ask Alma why she recommended them to Fabius for the mission. The handler responds that she wanted someone who understood what it meant to lose things. What the hunter lost, and how, is never clarified, or rather is left up to the player's interpretation and imagination. But this experience of loss nevertheless remains a core part of their character. If anyone listening has played the Mass Effect games, I would analogize the Avis Hunter in Wilds to that series' Commander Shepard, a customizable avatar who nonetheless comes with a semi-defined history and place within the world. The framing of the Avis Hunter creates an immediate parallel and contrast with Nata. Unlike the Hunter, Nata is young and explicitly naive, but he is also traumatized. He too understands deeply what it means to lose something, but unlike the Hunter, he is not framed as yet having the maturity or the experience to process this loss. As a foil, the hunter here steps into the role of mentor and guardian, perhaps even parental figure, a protective figure who also acts as a role model for Nata's journey. This is made clear both in what the hunter says to Nata, as in the scene in Wyveria where they comfort him and reassure him of the value of his unique perspective, but more often than not through the behavior they display and the decisions that they make. The hunter inspires Nata chiefly by example. There is a reason, after all, that when the low-rank story concludes, Nata is seemingly training to be a hunter, not a handler or a smithy. In joining the survey unit, he is not following explicitly in the footsteps of Alma or Gemma, but rather of us. This is likely to continue in Ascendance, with our older and presumably more mature Nata. But that's going to be a story for next year and likely a follow-up video. The contrast between Nata and the hunter comes to the fore at several key moments in the story, but most clearly in the encounters with Nata's other primary foil, the White Wraith. The first is during the encounter at the Wind's Gasp, when the Wraith attacks the resident Apex monster Ray Dow. Faced with the monster that took everything from him, Nata impulsively attempts to antagonize it. He picks up a rock to hurl at the creature, only prevented from doing so by the swift actions of the hunter. Held back, Nata begs the creature for a reason for its actions, for a sense of justice, and for the restoration of his home. He then begs the hunter to strike it down, declaring that he will do so himself if handed a weapon. The hunter does neither, of course. Instead, they silently pick the boy up, depositing him on the back of Alma's Sacred. This encounter acts as a narrative contrast with the second moment, in which the hunter is forced to kill the monster. And this one requires a bit more of a preamble. In contrast to that earlier encounter, the monster this time has a name. It is no longer the White Wraith, it is Arkveld. This in itself creates an immediately humanizing contrast, one that is reflected in Nata's differing behavior. Nata approaches this situation from the opposing perspective to his previous one, but with the same level of immaturity. He has found the reason for Arkveld's actions, and it is one that haunts him because, in a lot of ways, he relates to it. Reconnecting with the Keepers and with his own parental figure and close friend of his late father, Tashin, Nata learns not only that his family is still living, but that Arkveld is a guardian. It is an artificial monster, a servitor bred in a cocoon in the depths of the ruins of the city of Wyveria. Guardians cannot eat, cannot breed, cannot sleep, and cannot die of natural causes. They subsist on the energy of the Dragon Torch, a substance named Wyvern Milk, or Wilk, produced deep within the ruins, and they subsist in perpetuity. The Guardians, we are told, were dormant in their cocoons for centuries, watched over by the Keepers. That is, until the Guardian Arkveld unexpectedly awoke, went berserk, attacked the Keepers, and fled the city. Upon learning this information, Nata forms a psychological bond with Arkveld. Thinking back on his own journey to and from the West, the people he has met, and the experiences he has had, he empathizes with what he sees as Arkveld's desire to live free, to not be constrained by your origin and the fate foisted upon you from outside. He sees in it a resilience reflected in himself, and in the people he has met in Kunafa and Azuz. Learning about both Arkveld's and his own origins, Nata identifies with the creature, seeing its attempt to break free as a reflection of his own journey towards maturity. This psychological identification comes to a head when Avis unit, upon venturing deeper into the ruins of Wyveria, finds that Arkveld has gone mad. It is killing and consuming the monsters around it, despite it not even needing to eat, and leaving many to rot. The creature has, as a result, become a threat to Wyveria's ecosystem, one that both Alma and the Hunter immediately recognize has to be put down. Nata does not agree, or rather, does not want to agree. In a parallel with our earlier encounter, here's that pesky narrative foil coming back, he begs us not to kill the monster. He asks us to understand that Arkveld only wanted to be free, to live strong, and that, born into an artificial existence shorn of the things that Nata considers markers of a well-lived life, this was the first and only thing it ever chose for itself. This series of events is one where the writing in Wilds is most didactic, and accordingly least subtle. This sometimes gets made fun of, and not fully without reason. I myself often refer to it as Nata's "she's just like me for real" moment. It is a bit clunky. What can I say? The writers really wanted to make sure you got the point here. And from a purely diegetic perspective, it's important to remember that Nata is a traumatized teenager who has recently had his entire worldview upended. This kid had spent years of his life nursing a trauma tied to this creature, and when he met it again, his first instinct was to hurl a rock at her and probably get himself killed, or to find out that it was his own people who were probably in the moral wrong. Cut the little guy some slack. Like all of you weren't 14 once and proceeded to overly humanize a 40-foot monster that destroyed your home after learning its tragic backstory. Okay, that's actually a really specific life experience, but you get my point. That the ultimate confrontation with the Guardian Arkveld is framed around consumption, though, is something I think that is important to acknowledge. Nata seemingly finds the inability of Guardians to eat especially abhorrent. In his initial outburst to Tashin, it is this feature, along with freedom, that he specifically focuses on.
Is that what you call this? Constructed husks they can't even eat? Locked away when they're no longer needed? Arkveld.
Monster Hunter is rather infamous for its lovingly rendered food cutscenes. But food in Wilds' story also serves a core narrative purpose in stressing community, understanding, and gratitude. The first time we are offered a meal is in the village of Kunafa, with the siblings Nona and Isai, who we rescued in the opening of the game, and from whom we receive our sacred. After learning of Guardians, but before our final confrontation with Arkveld, we spend the night in the village of Suja, being offered another wonderful meal, while we as the Hunter are able to cook food on the fly on our little camp stove. Before the introduction of the Grand Hub in the first title update and its meal counter, the only way to get certain food buffs was to be explicitly invited to dinner. Eating in Wilds is a communal experience. It reinforces the bonds between people, both within and between groups. The food is also, and this is actually important, really good. The game focuses on the preparation and bringing of the food. The camera lingers on it on the plate and in the hand. The characters display genuine joy in the act of eating. What I'm saying here is that eating in Monster Hunter Wilds is not simply a form of interpersonal bonding or a way to gain stat boosts, but rather a subjective experience of personal pleasure and satisfaction. One that Guardians like Arkveld are denied by the circumstances of their creation. In keeping with this theme, all instances of Arkveld's appearance are consumption-based. Both encounters I've discussed above, in which Arkveld predates on Raydal and later butchers masses of Guardian Sacred, are preluded by two other, shorter encounters. The first takes place atop the dam in the Scarlet Forest, in which Nata realizes the White Wraith is real and not simply a product of his fevered imaginations, when it attacks and feeds on the weakened Uthduna. Arkveld drains the Lord of the Forest's energy with its chain blades, killing it but leaving no mark, an action it later performs on Raydal. In this scene, we see Nata stare at Uthduna's lifeless body, clearly in his mind acting as a metaphor for the fate he believes befell Tashin and the other keepers after his flight. This lays the groundwork for the first major encounter at the Wind's Gasp, where Nata seeks to antagonize the monster. The second encounter with Arkveld, meanwhile, is preluded with the initial Guardian revelation. Here, Nata has not only discovered that Tashin is alive, but that they were, in effect, a kind of jailer. He also learns that Arkveld cannot eat. Yet, when the creature bursts onto the scene, she is shown immediately pouncing on and consuming a series of Guardian Sacred. Not, now, with the mysterious mechanisms of the chain blades, but rather like any other monster with her jaws. The chains are a core part of Arkveld's design, and a part of what elevates her from an excellent creature design to something that carries a lot of narrative and symbolic weight within the story. Arkveld trails her chains as a prisoner might, hunched over and weighed down. Within a prominent piece of key art, the organic chains transform into literal metal chains holding her back. The symbolism here is not subtle, but it is effective. Arkveld's use as Nata's foil here circles around themes of restraint, freedom, and desire, a transcending of one's circumstances. Alongside their inability to eat, Nata is incensed by the Guardians' constraint, how they are locked away when no longer needed. Textually, Arkveld's chains are part of her body, a mechanism through which she hunts and feeds, but metatextually they are also a symbol of her struggle for self-determination and becoming. When we first encounter her, she can only feed through the symbols of her constraint, through her chains. When we meet her in Wyveria, however, she feeds with her jaws, as any non-Guardian would. In universe, this foreshadows both the gradual restoration of Arkveld's normal bodily functions, and the overconsumption that leads us to neutralize her. Arkveld eats without needing to eat, acting not to satisfy a bodily need for food, but out of personal desire, even addiction. On a symbolic level, this act represents Arkveld's transcending of the limitations placed upon her by the circumstances of her birth as a guardian, and her striving for freedom. She is no longer dependent on her chains, but can finally eat freely. However, this choice is also a destructive one. This may be the first thing she chose for herself, but Monster Hunter Wilds lands firmly in the camp of not just letting a girl have some hobbies. Jokes aside, what Arkveld is choosing to eat here is, I think, also meaningful, on multiple levels. The only times prior to this scene we have seen or heard of Arkveld feeding is on apex monsters, ones who are empowered by the elemental energies of the inclemencies. She is an apex predator of apex predators, an image that fits the visual design of a helmeted warrior. There is a sense of honor and warrior pride in Arkveld's design. While much like Nergigante, she is not adverse from leaping upon an already wounded source of nutritious bioenergy, she is an animal, after all. We often see Arkveld fight, and fight for, her food. In this final scene in Wyveria, she is not preying on large apex monsters, however, but small monsters, and more specifically the only small monster that is endemic to the ruins of Wyveria, Guardian Sacred. Wyveria is the only place in the game we encounter Sacred outside of Kunafa. They do not seemingly exist in the wilds, merely as either domesticated mounts and animal companions, or as artificially produced guardians. That is to say, Sacred are not normal monsters. At no point are they situated within the normal order of predator-prey interactions. And so, it is telling that Guardian Arkveld is specifically eating them when we are forced to put her down. We first encounter and receive the sacred through Nona and Isai, the pair that also offer us our first meal, whose culture also gives sacred to the expedition as a whole. Sacred here represent the first major cultural bond that the Forbidden Lands expedition team makes in the Eastlands. They are gifts of trust, companions who accompany and aid us in battle. As such, sacred signify a specific kind of communal bond, one that is also reinforced by our first communal meal. By slaughtering the Guardian Sacred, not even just from predatory need but rather for destructive self-desire, Arkveld is not only upending the stability of Wyveria's own ecosystem, but also a kind of metaphorical social contract that we have built up throughout the narrative. Her ravenous consumption is not communal. As Alma says, it is not predatory behavior, it is simply destructive. This is something that Nata, with time and reflection, does come to understand. When at the end of the base game's high rank story, the party encounters another Arkveld, this time not a Guardian, driven partially mad from the frenzy virus in the land spine having filtered up to her like mercury concentration in sharks, Nata advises the hunter to hunt it. It is, he says, in a moment that should make any parent proud, what he would do. Yet if Nata's decision to hunt the frenzy-riddled Arkveld serves as the capstone and epilogue to his narrative arc, at least before Master Rank, then its conclusion comes earlier, at the Dragon Torch. After the slaying of the Guardian Arkveld, Avis Unit discovers the beating heart of Wyveria, an artificial organic construct called the Dragon Torch, which fuels the unique ecosystems of the region. And upon the Dragon Torch, they find Xochia, Wyveria's final weapon, its manufacturer's savior and architect of its collapse. Retreating to Suja, the expedition learns of Xochia, and they also learn that Nata's pendant, passed down from his deceased father, has the capacity to shut off the Dragon Torch, and, by starving Xochia and the Guardians of Sustenance, prevent the monster's awakening and eventual rampage. Yet, to switch off the Dragon Torch would destroy not simply the unique ecosystem of the Guardians of Wyveria, but the entire ecological foundation of the Eastlands. However, when Xochia awakens, as it eventually will, it could destroy everything, as it once did before. The conversation that results is tense, the decision is hard, and it is fundamentally one in which Nata, as bearer of the tool to enact this plan, has an opinion that carries weight. But eventually, Nata makes a decision. He will switch off the torch. It is, he says, what his father would do, and he is a keeper too. Reminiscing on their journey along the way, Nata and Avis Unit then return to the Dragon Torch. And Nata, determined to do a duty that only he can perform, steps forward. But his steps are faltering, weighted down, agonized. He clearly wrestles with this decision and its potential consequences. And in this moment, the hunter steps forward. Laying a hand on Nata's shoulder, they tell him that there is another path, another way. And entrusting Nata into the care of Alma and Gemma, they step forward, shatter the protective wall of Wilk around the torch, and as Xochia unfurls from its slumber, declares that they will slay the Guardian. Not on the order of the Guild, on their own. I've seen some people read this scene as us, in the role of the Avis Hunter, taking away Nata's agency within this situation. And while I can understand why people have this view, I think it fundamentally misunderstands what this moment is about. I think it misunderstands the hunter's actions, what Nata's personal motives are, and what the narrative is actually trying to tell us about hunters in general. There are two factors that I think are important here. The first is that what we are doing is, strictly speaking, very illegal. We are not hunting Xochia, we are poaching it. There is a reason that when Fabius receives the report from Alma, it engages in a bit of subtle misdirection. Xochia simply awoke, and had to, in an agonizing decision taken in the heat of crisis, be put down. A tragic, unfortunate turn of events. So sad. Couldn't really be helped. Please don't send any guild knights after us. The second factor is that Nata is a child. one who has gained a wealth of experiences and grown in maturity in our journey with him, but still a child, and a traumatized one at that. His trauma hasn't suddenly disappeared now that Arkveld is dead. It might even be worse. Setting aside narrative theming briefly and engaging with this moment strictly through a framework of in-universe rationales, I have to say something here. Letting a traumatized young boy decide the fate of an entire ecosystem, its monsters and its people, would have been a monumentally stupid and cruel thing to do. Imagine Nata being forced to watch as the guardians on whose behalf he was so angry died due to his own actions. How the entire way of life of Azuz that he admired so much was switched off at the mains. Or how Nona, his arguably first friend's way of life, fell apart because there was no more Sandtide and no plenty to follow. There is a reason that Olivia offers to do this action for him. She gets it. She is a protector, driven by a strong moral compass. While she defers to the group in allowing Nata to bear the burden, she is very clearly not happy about this. She also stresses to the hunter that she will be ready to act when called upon. Part of her suspects that we are going to intervene. Because yeah, honestly, to actually not intervene would kinda have been really stupid. But, and I think this is important from an actual character and narrative perspective, this intervention is also one that Nata's own faltering steps allow to happen. Had Nata strode towards the Dragon Torch in the full courage of his convictions, I do not actually think we would have stepped in. I do still think that would have been kind of stupid, but solely from an in-character perspective, I get it. Wilds would not have been the first piece of Japanese media I have engaged with that lets a teenager decide the fate of the world after all, and it wouldn't have been the last. We have watched Nata grow throughout the story from a scared young boy to a slightly less scared young boy, but one with a lot more knowledge and experience on his shoulders. Someone with the potential to own their own choices. But his steps make clear to us, to the Avis unit, but also to the player, that this is not a choice that Nata is owning. Compare this moment with the one at the end of High Rank, where he tells us that putting down the frenzied Arkveld is what he would do. He is calm there. He is not calm here. Shutting down the Dragon Torch is a choice that Nata thinks he has to make, because no other viable option is presented to him, because he is a keeper, and because he thinks it is the choice that his father would make. Xochitl will wake up, and when it does, it will kill everything. Nata spends much of the game lamenting his ability to act, either in the face of Arkveld or in his ability to guide the expedition quickly and swiftly to his home. And now, he may be able to avert catastrophe, because of a gift that his father left to him. This is something that he and only he can do. Now, we do not know Nata's father. Maybe, as Nata says, this is the choice he would have made. I was a teenager once, though, and I generally do not trust decisions I would have made then based on my vague impressions of my parents' underlying character and motivations. Regardless, his father would still be making this choice as an adult with a fully formed frontal lobe and cognitive faculties to boot. An adult able to bear the weight and to contemplate the ramifications of this decision, or at least to be trusted to think that they could. But Nata is neither an adult nor his father. And his father is, importantly, also not his only parental figure. There is Tashin, of course. But there is also us. Earlier, I talked about the way that the hunter acts as a role model for Nata, leading by example. But we are also a guide and a guardian. We are given the mission by the guild explicitly to protect and watch over Nata, but we don't only do this. When he expresses guilt on the Ice Shard Cliffs at not being able to lead the expedition straight to his home, the hunter reminds him of his resilience, that he, and he alone, was the first person ever to make the journey west in 1,000 years, in search of help, a help that he found. When he buckles in the face of the Guardian revelation from Tashin, the hunter kneels down to his level and tells him that it is due to his journey, his unique blend of upbringing and experience, that he has the perspective that he does. Like a good parental figure, when Nata expresses doubt in himself, we are there to remind him that he has uniqueness, resilience, and value by virtue of who he is. That he has a strength that is a product of his character and of his circumstances. But we are also there to help protect him from making stupid decisions. We do so when we stop him throwing the rock at Arkveld, and we do so at the Dragon Torch, in which he is about to hurl another, shinier rock at a much larger monster with potentially much more far-reaching consequences. And I think the fact that we do not do this on the orders of the guild, but by our own, is central here, for a few reasons. Firstly, by doing so, we are relieving Alma, Gemma, and the guild as a whole of any culpability in what might follow. This is our burden to bear, our choice, and our consequences. The second is that we are doing this for Nata of our own volition, not because of the order of the guild to watch over him. Watch, Alma tells Nata, as we march towards the sleeping Seraph Dragon. This is what hunters do. And it is, after a fashion. Not by following orders, or even following protocol, but making an executive decision as someone who has known loss and borne its weight to stand on the front lines and place our safety and survival secondary to safeguarding a child from bad choices and further trauma, and through doing so, the entire Eastland's ecosystem from irreparable harm. This is, narratively speaking, the first thing we decide for ourselves. This one took a while to make. This is a piece, I admit, that was somewhat fueled by spite. I really got annoyed at everyone making fun of Nata when the game came out, and so this is a bit of a revenge video essay. Nata is probably my favourite character in Wilds, simply in terms of how well his arc is done, and how it ties into both the flagship and the player avatar, and I admit I'm really excited to see how he may grow up, both physically and emotionally, in Ascendance. I'm curious if he'll actually get his own kind of complete by my own order decision moment, now that he's finally going to be an adult, or at least as much of an adult as we're likely to see him within the scope of Wilds' narrative. Maybe he'll show up again down the line, like Aiden and the other Monster Hunter 4 aces. This video was really fun to write, and there are a few things I wanted to include but just didn't have the time or space. Some of those are going to go in future videos, but one fun observation I wanted to add here is that when Nata goes to attack Arkveld at Wind's Gasp, he hops off Gemma's Sacred, and the Smith fails to stop him. In the second encounter, Gemma is the one who specifically holds Nata back when Nata begins to berate the Hunter. I just think that's a nice little character detail, and it does make me wonder how Gemma must have felt when we carried Nata back past her and handed him to Alma. I hope all of you enjoyed this one though. Next week's might be a bit less of an analytic piece to give myself a bit of a break and just engage in some fun speculation about the expansion, but you can expect it to still have my signature style. Regardless, I hope you all have a good week. Love and solidarity to you all. This has been Laraika Laray, signing off.
Did I go and burst the bubble? Promise more than I can give. I tried to touch its cosmic sheen, but today all I smell is chlorine. Yesterday I was deep sea diving, but today I found a floor. Run my fingers over its surface, but I couldn't find a door.